Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? Cool.
Yes, we can.
So welcome everyone to the second INFRA Plus webinar series after a very successful session last week on infrastructure financing models and resilience building. The INFRA Plus webinar series are convened by Dr. Deliana Alsifova, whom I proudly call my PhD supervisor. Thank you, Deliana, for inviting me to chair this session. The INFRA series aim to identify links between context-specific infrastructural challenges, cross-boundary mechanisms and interventions towards improved sustainability and transdisciplinary perspectives for future research. INFRA Plus will be running up until July, almost on a weekly basis. So do please feel free to check out the events to come via Eventbrite and definitely register if they are of interest. And please also share these events widely among your colleagues and students where you see appropriate. And so today we'll welcome you 5 wonderful speakers who will give us 3 talks with the focus area of East Asia. We will hear case studies from Shanghai, China, and Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, with each of their specific climatic and socio-political complexity, particularly how infrastructural systems are reflecting and possibly responding to the challenges posed by rapidly urbanizing and high-density regions, such that of public health, children development, safety and security, housing division, air and water pollution. So each talk will be delivered at around 30 to 45 minutes. We then have 15 minutes to 20 minutes to open up questions and discussions from the audience. If you have an immediate question that cannot wait, please use the chat function, or alternatively, wait until each speaker finishes the presentation. We will be recording the session and it is going live on YouTube. So please notify us in the chat if you'd like to remain anonymous, and also feel free to raise questions anonymously. May I also kindly remind the audience to mute themselves while the speakers are presenting. So the first talk is given by Dr. Nannan Dong from Department of Landscape Studies in Tongji University, Shanghai. Dr. Dong has been extensively researching on the construction strategy of children's friendly environment in high-density cities. He has led the first Chinese expert team to share the construction strategy of children-friendly environment in China. He has co-edited the first group standard for child development, quoted guideline for outdoor children playground design, led by the Chinese Society of Landscape Architecture. Recently, Dr. Dong has hosted and co-organized more than 10 forums for children-friendly design and published chapters on children's park in the book Collection of Landscape Design Materials. So without further ado, I will now give floors to Dr. Nannan Dong. Please welcome.
Hello, thanks for the invitation and thanks for your introduction. Now, may I share my screen now? Okay. I hope you can see that. No, a little bit animation. Okay, so I'm a little bit wondering if I should say good day or good evening because of the timing difference. It's my great honor to join such a wonderful organized event tonight based on the Beijing time. But it's quite active now. So my topic is about the children's play infrastructure, especially based on my working experience and the research recent going in China, especially in Shanghai. So I think we have such a very wide discussion about the infrastructure topic in such a serious webinar talks. But from my viewpoint, I have been teaching in Tongji University, just like as introduced, we have been trying to combine the social viewpoint to the physical environment. So one of such a very important study scope is refers to the children. So that's why I want to share my points and experience in such field. So we just try to use the play infrastructure to talk about the location and opportunity as well even some further development opportunity in Chinese cities. Let me just introduce my team. Because we have very limited time online, so I could not invite all my colleagues to join us. So I just want to say we have a little bit integrated team. I am one of the initiators in such integrated team, and also collaborate with my colleague in Tongji, young professor Jing Liang, and he's very nice professor and integrated the design and the practice together. We all, of course, also have one postdoc, Miss Pai Tang, and she also graduated from Sheffield. And we also have one PhD candidate, Ms. Dan Yang, and also two initiators who are also Tongji's alumnus, co-founders of one of the very famous local NGO program with the name of Nature Seeds. I will also introduce some activities funded by such a very interesting nature educational teams in Shanghai. The reason I initiated such a topic because we are in China, we are very widely facing to a very big challenge, and how and where we can provide more play activity for the opportunity for the kids, especially in the high density city. I guess because today we have our talkers from East Asia, so I think we have much more very similar urban context in such a high density in construction. So from one side, we are very difficult to deal with high density, even as well as such a co-effect by such a high density, just like the traffic problem, just like environmental problem. So I think we are facing how to balance the play opportunity and the risk in such a high density areas. So that's why we think that's so important even for the urban planner, landscape planner, and architect, even social workers. That has been very widely concerned problem. So I just will use such around a half hour to talk about a little bit about the background and as well our practice and our some research thinking, as well to-do list, as well our network in the future. Let me just start with the background. I think probably you are very familiar with the development of the children-friendly environment or children-friendly city development in the world. Because one of such a very important event since the 1990s is the new funding of the child-friendly cities initiatives, as well as UNICEF has been very widely influential in the world. Even in China, that's also has been collaborating very intensively with the Chinese cities and the local government, as well as some NGO role players. So that has been a very widely initiated, I think, in the world, as well also based on such General Convention 17, as well as the Child-Friendly Cities and Communities Handbook published in 2018 has been a very good guideline for the local government, even for the local stakeholders to initiate or push such a new development for such a child-friendly policies or opportunities. In such map, we can see that the China is starting, but still on the way for such children-friendly development. So that's just my observation as my practice. I think in China we have at least such 5 directions which challenge the provision or supply for the urban kids for such a playability. The first sense is such social and from the social, economical, culture, as well as the urban context. The first thing is PA, the physical activity. We are facing now a very big challenge of the physical condition of the kids, just like some because of such a lack of the sufficient activity. So there has been some very high challengeful risk to the children's physical and mental health. And the second problem or challenge we are now facing is such urban public space insufficiency. So because from one side, China is now very widely carry out the urban renewal as well as especially the old community renewal. So that's provide a very big opportunity for us to integrate such a social goals into the physical renewal. So you can find a lot of such a new renewal project, try to provide a more opportunity to the kids for the outdoor activities. And the third part is such a very rapid urbanization because you know in the past 3 decades, the China such urbanization developed so fast. So we are just now trying to have a review, a back view to see if we should provide more consideration of the supply of the outdoor space, especially for the kids. And in such a very big immigration between the city and the rural area, we can find also such left behind children, the whose population is relatively very big. So even we go to the rural area, we will also try to see how to promote the environmental or the development opportunity for the kids, even in such a very remote villages. And the last challenge is about we call the intergenerational parenting. Both because of the family culture and because of such co-family lifestyle in Chinese cities, we can find such intergeneration parenting has been more and more common in such a very high density city. So that means if we're talking about the kids, we are also set up a very important consideration about who are looking after the kids during the duty days. In Chinese cities, you can find very common phenomenon about such grandparents role playing in such daily parenting. So you can see in such a new 5 years plan, you know, which is very important for Chinese strategic planning, both of the country and for the local cities. The central government already initiated a very big step of the children-friendly cities. It has been planned to try to carry out around 100 children-friendly cities, of course, according to the new guideline as well as the criteria. In the recent years, as you know, the Shenzhen is the first children-friendly city in China, and also followed by dozens of the cities. Of course, in China, the most cities now focusing on the community scale rather in the city scale. But based on such a new 5 years plan, more and more Chinese cities set up the very new 5 years plan, try to promote such environment, even the infrastructure for the kids. Based on such a background or the trend, I want to talk a little bit about what we have done in the past years. So just as I introduced, we are getting involved in many and various children-friendly projects based on the different background in the urbanized area, in the old community, in the rural area, and even in some nature education, as well even in some policy making or guideline making. The first topic of our practice about in such a fast urbanized area. In China, I think you know very well about how fast the Chinese cities as well as developed in the past 30 years. And in such a we have around half of the children's population living in the urban area. And so in such a new urban area, because we have so many kids born even just in the city, so you can imagine the kids as well as the young parents are living in such a new developed residential areas. I think maybe we also have the speakers will talk about on the community, even the housing project. So in China, such a new housing project is very important for the young couple to consider one and as well when to have or welcome their first kids, even the second kids. So in this case, we have been collaborating with some real estate developers to study on such a children-friendly community or children living condition in such a new developed community in China. One of such pioneers real estate developer is Dongyuan Group. So we have been carried out almost more than 5 years project in their community to study on how developed the local community based on such a guideline for the children-friendly community, and what is good, what is not good, and what is the standard, and how to support the kids as well family in more continuous way. And the second direction we are involved is how to achieve the potential space for the kids, as well as how to improve the value of the existing green or the parks in the city for the children. So one of such project, just as you see on my right hand, and on such a right hand, you can see we initiate some rooftop garden for the kids based on the participation of the children. But in fact, we are even in the recent weeks, we are invited to co-design with the principals of the primary school together to initiate more rooftop garden for the children. You know, especially in Shanghai, we have very limited scale of the land use for the educational or the primary school or middle school. So that means we have the insufficient land on the ground floor to provide the education or for the nature observation of the kids. So one of such a potential way is to try to use the rooftop for the kids, even to develop that as a rooftop nature garden. So that this project is one of our first project, and we are now designing the second generation of such kind of the rooftop garden, even with the rooftop botanical garden and the rooftop such activity sports. And meanwhile, we also have a very intensive study on the existing park or communities park, and we have been study on the social value or the service value of such existing green from the children as well as the parents' viewpoint. For example, such a security and as the security and risk, as well as such activity possibility for the kids, and as well as the intergeneration interest in the existing parks. Just as I said, in Shanghai, of course, that's also quite comparable with the other Chinese faster urbanized area. We have very big number of the new developed new town or new district. So in such new district, it has been very common strategy to develop a very large scale green or large scale park in the center or as a very important public green for the citizens. So we can consider that is a very traditional way of the conservation to provide the private or public green for the citizens. But if we consider how to convert such a bigger scale public park or public green into the children infrastructure, that might be very important for us to consider the scale, activity, or some very specific demands of the kids. So one of such a strategy to reuse or promote or reuse such an existing big park is to use some renewal project to provide just small scales or more adaptive landscape for the kids. So this slides just to show you one of our experiments last year. We are invited to design a children's garden in Shanghai Garden Show, which is taking place yearly. In such a garden show, they have some theme garden. We'll provide a temporary garden for the visitors. So we just initiate to, if we can use such kind of the show garden for the kids, we just try to demonstrate it to how to convert a very big park, or at least use one small part of it for the kids. So we just try to use the natural material as well as the plants, and to satisfy the kids as well as the parents. And we even initiated some lighting program for the kids, and to enjoy the night event in such a small garden. Of course, just as I introduced, we have very big scale, a number of the older communities, and such a renewal has been considered as one of the very important urban renewal project very widely. So we have been granted by a Shanghai municipal funding project to study if we can and how to initiate intergeneration shareable public space in such community between the aging people and the kids. Just as I told you, in Chinese family culture, it's quite common in such an old community to see the intergeneration or such parenting by the grandparents. So we just try to say, if such a grandparents parenting are so common, if we can find where is the best place to satisfy both the aged people and the kids. So we did such some household survey as well as the interview, and we are now just collected some very roughly data, and we just find at least both locations are very highly welcomed by such intergeneration activity. One of such place is a community garden. Of course, that's quite understandable because the aged people could find some fitness or sports facility, and the kids could also enjoy the free atmosphere. But another location is beyond our generation. It's quite close to the entrance of such a community, because the old people are very usually to pass through the main entrance from the community and to the their food market, or even to the street shops. So that is a very important social place, not only for individual activity, but also for the gathering among the aged people. So the aged people are very common to bring their grandkids, children with them, and if they have such public space, if that's allowed. So that's give us a very good inspiration. If we can try to a little bit provide more public space at the main entrance, of course, the traffic conflict should be considerable, but that's could also very important gathering place among the aged people, even the international generations. Let me talk about the rural area. This photo was taken by me just 5 days ago. Last Saturday, I was invited into a rural artistic program. And so, in China, such a rural revitalization is a very major program right now in China. And as well as in a lot of Chinese villages, you can find such left behind kids, which have a relative very big number and a very big population. Such photos I show you are totally designed and initiated by our team. We just try to provide more public space for the family, for the such intergeneration of the grandparents and the kids, and we also try to provide more opportunity for the kids to play in more safe way. For example, such a bridge on the right hand is a new replacement for the formal canals, for the formal bridges. So we just try to provide a little bit more space for the kids to play above the river. And another photos you can see that is also a new project we shaped last Saturday, and we just was invited to shape installation in the rural area, and we don't want to construct too much, just provide a bench, and with a very big, just with such a bamboo installation, and to give a very special landmark, but allow the local villagers to have the photo, to enjoy there, and even have the chatting there. Of course, we also have such a rice garden program, which has been carried out over 5 years in Shanghai villages. Such a rice garden program is a very artistic-based consideration to use such a rice field to provide activity for the urban kids to play with the rural kids together. And the nature deficit disorder is asking more opportunity for the nature education. So just as I introduced, our both colleagues founded such nature seeds, and it has been invited very widely in Shanghai, even in the touristic area, even in the campus, in the private school, to provide more educational opportunity for kids to learn from the nature. That should provide a very big opportunity for kids to learn from such nature, from the plants, from the ecology. And another is the children-friendly environment exchange, or the guideline making. We have been spent a lot of time to collaborate with the scholars or even the planner or designer together. We are invited to participate in the first Chinese integrated stand for the guideline of the outdoor recreational space of the kids. And we're also involved in such children parks collection books, the guidebooks. And we also invited the different disciplines to join such a discussion how to shape a more integrated infrastructure for the kids together. Of course, the children's participation should be very considerable. So that we are also invited, we went to the primary school to organize the kids as well as the teacher together to how we try to help them to express their vision or the demands of the urban area as well as the urban parks. So based on our practice, we just try to sum them up. We thought it's quite very important responsibility of our team to study furtherly on the infrastructure which could integrate all different viewpoints or different disciplines together, and to make this more systematic, and to give the assessment tools or more standards in the practice in the future. So in our research, we just initiating now in China with such topics of children play infrastructure. So the topic is to try to promote or increase the opportunity of the play in the city of the children. We just, based on the learning from the overseas experience, especially from the such a foreign experience, we just try to learning from the affordance and based on such supporting of the children's playing in the city. We have been comparing the foreign standards and norms with the Chinese standards. We find that we has been there are very important integrated viewpoints between the independent mobility and the playability of the children together. So in fact, we are now in Tongji, we are very intensively collaborating with the transportation scientists together who are very specialized on such workability of the children. So this slide shows you the framework of our very roughly consideration of this infrastructure from the social, from the political, or from the built environment. That's just starting point for our research because we just studied since last year in such a play infrastructures consideration. And we are very expecting to the implementation of such a study in the environmental and design and the policy making, as well as a service supplier. So this is a triangle structure, just show you our very roughly expectation of such a study in the future. Of course, the final implementation will be focusing on the supply of the playable space of playability based on the social, political, and such environmental conditions. So, and we try to combine that in the future to the community, to the rural, to the urban parks. So in this case, we just set up a to-do list in the future. So we try to form a set of playable space system in the Chinese context and try to create some assessment or observation tools for such a standard in the future. And we, based on such systematic consideration as well as the tools, we try to promote such a mechanism and also to develop the guideline, even to renew some mechanism in such a practice in the urban friendly, in the children friendly city as well as the community in the future. So such a playable space will be one of such very big topic both in the research and in the practice. And such assessment tools will help us to use us in the community as well in the city scale. So one of our close futures program is a summer school. This summer school will, based on our college supporting, we try to set up such a summer school to even to invite our foreign scholars or experts, and also because of such a healthy reason, it's a pity we can only invite the Chinese student to participate. Maybe in the close future, we can also invite the foreign student to join us. And such a summer school will be a very important exchange platform about such a play infrastructure. So I suppose maybe we can even link somehow our summer school later with such a webinars outcome somehow. Besides, we are also expect to build up the network, even some joint lab inside in such webinar participants, even outside. So that's just my introduction. And anyway, we are now just on the way, and we thought we can learn a lot from your experience, and we are also very looking forward to more exchange and potential collaboration in the future. So that's all. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Dong. It's such a fantastic talk. Now, I don't see any questions posted in chat. Shall I start with a few questions? Because what Professor Dong presented really speak to my earlier experiences in China. And so it's really wonderful to see those children, so to see those projects where children can have a say in it, and school kids can also have a say in it. But I wonder, as you said, it's one of your to-do, it's in one of your to-do lists that's to promote the whole process, children participation thing. So in terms of this aim, I wonder what have been done already, what kinds of schools are able to participate in this kind of projects, how are they selected? And in terms of sustainability wise, I wonder what we can learn from those, what has been done in Shanghai, for example.
Okay, yeah, thank you for a very good question. really refer to such children participation, that depends on the topic or depends on the questions, because based on my experience, even the survey practice, we can classify such kind of participation in two major groups. In the primary school, sometimes we just we get very strongly supporting from their teachers, even their principals. For example, just in the slide I show you, that is very strongly supported by the primary school's principals. They help us to organize the kids. And of course, you also mentioned a very good question, how they select the kids. So that is very important, since some kind, I think that depends on the process. For our first such participation test, they are very, we can see the principal as well as the teachers are a little bit are very careful. So they just select their best children, their best student to participate. So that's a little bit give us a very big pressure, because we are not anticipate only their best or talented student to participate in such a program. I think that's a little bit misunderstanding, because the principal and the teachers thought, okay, you guys come from the university, so we will show you our best students. So, and even accompanied by their parents, because that's a topic is about their experience of the urban environment in their neighborhoods. That is our topics at such participation. We want such kids to express how they feel the most safe or unsafe place of their neighborhood in such area. And of course, we just not only anticipating their talking, we also give there some sticker. So the children could use their sticker to stand for some laughing sticker stand for the positive, and the crying sticker stand for the not good or the negative space in the city. And so that is the first round that gave more confidence, self-confidence for the kids. And the second step, when the kids are used to such a program, we just try to encourage the kids to talk. What is the feeling based on their personal experience? So that's what we have done. And another groups taking place in the community, in the for example in do well the community, such kind of participating a little bit difficult, because that's also at the beginning phase, their parents are a little bit just a little bit doubtful, and what is our purpose behind. But when we get the trust from the parents, they will let their kids to express or to talk about their feeling in more independent way. So from my experience, I think it's especially in Chinese culture, the first step is to try to get their trust or to get their confidence. When they're both either the principal or teacher or the parents trust us, so we can provide more independent opportunity for the kids to collect their idea. So that's my experience.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That really speaks to my early memories of participating in these projects, because only the best students got chosen to participate, and even so, we feel a bit reluctant to open up. We don't know what we are expected to say. So I think it definitely trust is the first step, and relate to this question, I'm also concerned about, it also speaks to the educational pressure, educational stress that a lot of younger parents are experiencing. So how can we, in a sense, I think this is something that relates to the bigger picture in Chinese rapidly urbanization, in a sense where people feel like stressed, they have to keep up, they have to, work hard to provide better education and better life for their children. And in the other sense, they themselves are somehow lost the connection to, they don't have this beautiful memories of playing outside, of connecting to nature during their growing up period, during this rapid urbanization. So it's it sounds to me that there's a loss of reference frame of playing outdoor, even playing risky outdoor activities. And somehow I wonder whether how long this trust and connection to nature, to the wild, to the risky play outdoor activities can come back to Chinese cities.
So I think, based on my observation, I think I think that is also a very good question. You're saying totally true. We have such a very big challenge about such an educational or study pressure of the kids as well as the parents. But based on my observation, such a situation is a little bit changing. I think it's not so very obviously positive, but a little bit changing. I think that depends on the parents. I think one of such an opportunity is the intergeneration, in such an intergeneration, or we can also say that interaction. Because just as you said, a lot of young parents just send or even accompany their kids go to some private school, or even go to some other courses even after the school time, and the kids was transferred or delivered from one sport to another sport. But I think if we try to encourage the kids to go to outside to have the outdoor activity, I think sometimes is still very difficult unless their parents also enjoy it. So in Chinese, we call them such young parents. Sometimes we call they are just most generation born in 1980. In 1980s. So if you go to such, if you see such a nature educational program, even some sport event, try to attract the young kids to enjoy such outdoor activity. Sometimes that was designed to have the interaction between the parents and the kids together. Where such a program could not only attract the kids, if their parents have no interest, such program will be very difficult to have the kids in the big number. So they just try to design a lot of interaction. For example, if you go to the botanic garden, they give you some question or give you some game which should be played with your parents together. So the young parents also enjoy that. And even you go to some sports, you ask the daddies to run with the kids together, and so they enjoy a lot during such process. So that's why I mentioned we just spend more and more time to study not on the children group alone, but also on the parents or even the grandparents. Because the Chinese culture, the kids is not very independent compared with the foreign the kids in the foreign country or foreign cities. So that's very important for us also set up one eye to see what happened on the parents or their grandparents who are their supervisors. So that if they refrain or limit the kids' activity, or if they play with the kids together. So that will be very important. So from my perspectives, when we have more interaction between the parents or even and the kids, we might have more opportunity for the kids to set them free. So that's my observation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Dong. That's very informative. We got a comment from Norma Valencio saying it's the initiatives you shared are very inspiring. Thank you, and congrats on the ideas and thank you for all those social and educational aspects that you share. Are we seeing more questions being raised from the audience or any comments? Please feel free to raise or just raise a hand. Okay, so if not, we can just wrap it up and then continue to the next presentation. So thank you again, Dr. Dong. It's very informative and inspirational. So our second presentation will be given by Professor Daniel Karthe, Professor Gantuya Ganbat, and Ms. Halim Lee. Professor Daniel Karthe is going to talk about infrastructure system in Ulaanbaatar, the capital city of Mongolia. He currently leads UNU-FLORES research program quoted Resource Nexus for Regions in Transformation. He has about 20 years of research and teaching experience on hydrology, water quality, and aquatic resources management with projects in Germany, Central Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. His research interests include the resource nexus with a particular focus on science-based management concepts for environmental resources, including water, soil, and air. Professor Karthe currently works on sustainability of transformation processes in post-coal mining regions. Professor Gantuya Ganbat is an assistant professor of environmental engineering at the German-Mongolian Institute for Resource and Technology, Mongolia, that's based in Mongolia. She has gained experience in conducting research on urban meteorology and air pollution in South Korea, Hong Kong, and Mongolia. Professor Ganbat has been involved in regional professional activities, including Scientific Advisory Committee, East Asian Network in Acid Deposition, and Science and Policy Committee, and Northeast Asian Clean Air Partnership. Ms. Halim Lee currently works as a senior research assistant for Resource Nexus for Regions in Transformation at the UNU-FLORES. She has conducted research works on sustainable development goals, water security, water flood energy nexus, etc. Her research interests are in water resources management and environmental monitoring, such as forecasting climate change impacts. So now, please, can we welcome the three presenters who will be presenting the talk jointly. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ms. Ye. Thank you very much, Professor Dong, for your very interesting first presentation of today's session. And I think it was very exciting to hear about children's play infrastructures, which would definitely also be a very relevant topic to look at, for example, in Ulaanbaatar. Our presentation will be looking at some different kinds of infrastructures. We will be looking at several types of infrastructures in the next maybe 40 minutes and assessing them from a resource nexus and public health perspective. So firstly, I would like to give you a short introduction to urbanization processes and the fragmentation of the city of Ulaanbaatar, including some first introduction into the linkages between urbanization, environment, and health, and then come to the assessment from a resource nexus and public health perspective, looking at problems related to air pollution, water and sanitation, soil contamination, and interlinkages between these different environmental problems. And as you will see, these problems are strongly related to specific infrastructures. And then in the end, we will come to a summary and some conclusions. So firstly, when looking at urbanization, basically, it is a global phenomenon that the percentage of the urban population is increasing. Since 2007, we live in a predominantly urbanized world. Currently, it's more than 56% of the world population living in cities. And when looking at Mongolia, things at first sight are a bit surprising because we are talking about a country that has a nomadic history, but Mongolia is even more urban than the world average. So since 1977, more than 50% of the country's population have been living in urban areas. And in 2019, this has increased to 68.5%. And a very high proportion of this urban population actually lives in the national capital of Ulaanbaatar. The World Health Organization has started a program on healthy cities in 2011, looking at various different goals, including a clean and safe physical environment of high quality and an ecosystem that is stable now, but also sustainable in the long term. And when we now look at healthy cities, basically we can state that infrastructures are one important point for intervention. So if we think about how to make a city more healthy, how to have positive health outcomes, one of the points to look at are the infrastructures. It's not the only factor that is relevant, but one factor that can make a huge difference. Now, when looking at Ulaanbaatar, we can say that it is an extreme example of primacy. 69% of Mongolia's urban population live in Ulaanbaatar, and the city basically experienced two main periods of urban growth. Cities in Mongolia are a relatively young phenomenon. So cities started growing during the 1950s and 1960s when the Soviet Union, who controlled basically the fate of the country, propagated an urban lifestyle which was stated to be modern and socialist. But then when Mongolia became independent in the 1990s, basically a massive migration towards the capital city of Ulaanbaatar set in as a consequence of democratization and the introduction of a market-oriented economy. So people living in rural areas saw problems to secure their livelihoods, and they found simply better opportunities to generate income in the city. And one very specific phenomenon when looking at cities in Mongolia, including Ulaanbaatar, is that a significant proportion of the population, more than 50%, live in so-called ger areas. And you can see a picture on the right side here, which shows a ger, which is the traditional Mongolian felt tent, which has given the name to this type of area. And typically in these areas, people would either live in the traditional felt tents or live in mostly simple wooden houses, but sometimes even proper stone-made houses. And there are significant differences between these ger areas and the apartment areas when looking at infrastructures. On this picture, which is a 2021 image taken from Google Maps, you can very nicely see how the city is clearly divided into residential areas where people live in multi-story apartment buildings, which you can see in the southern half of this picture. And you can see ger areas located to the north of it. And basically, we can say that in Ulaanbaatar, when we look at the urban fringes into all directions, there has been growth of these ger areas that have predominantly grown in the years following the 1990s. And when we look at the apartment areas and the ger areas, and we compare the infrastructures, we can state that there are significant differences regarding, for example, water supply, sanitation, heating, electrical supply, and also traffic infrastructure. So regarding water supply, basically the apartment areas are served by a 24/7 pipe supply, whereas people living in the GER areas would either get their water from water kiosks, so they would bring a container, fill it up at a water kiosk and pay a certain amount for the water and then carry it home to their dwellings. Or in some places, they would take water coming from wells or even utilize surface water. The situation is similar for sanitation. The apartment areas, people would typically use flush toilets, and the wastewater would be sent to a central wastewater treatment plant through a collection system. Whereas in the GER areas, people would typically use latrines, which are often only poorly sealed or even unsealed. When looking at heating, and you will soon see this when we talk about air pollution, there is a significant difference between the apartment areas where district heating is supplied that comes from the city's power plants, whereas in the GER areas, people use small stoves for cooking and heating. And there are only a few major buildings in the GER areas, such as, for example, schools or hospitals or other municipal buildings that are typically served by so-called heat-only boilers. And basically, when looking at emission perspective, these small stoves and heat-only boilers tend to be far worse than the electric power stations, where at least some filtration systems have been installed. When looking at the electricity, basically the apartment areas tend to be served by a high quality grid providing 24/7 electric supply, whereas an electric grid also exists in GER areas, but this grid is partly informal, and basically people would not be able to have the same amount of power that they could use as compared to the apartment areas. When looking at traffic, the apartment areas have a sealed road network, and they tend to be well served by a municipal bus network, whereas the GER areas have unsealed roads and only limited public transport. And with this, we will now come to the problem of air pollution, where my colleague, Professor Ganbat, would now be taking over.
Okay, thank you. In terms of air quality, one of the most polluted capital cities in the world is Ulaanbaatar. In wintertime, at least for last 2 decades, Ulaanbaatar is facing severe air pollution problem. So Ulaanbaatar's poor air pollution, poor air quality in wintertime is associated with several factors. The one is it's a geographical feature. The city is surrounded by cities, and in that the situation in wintertime, the very stable air with the temperature inversion in wintertime is exists. And the second reason is the source of air pollution is attributed to the several sources, like Professor Karthe mentioned, the GER area. There are around 200,000 households or 200,000 small chimneys in GER and also in small houses, and 3,000, nearly 3,000 heat-only boilers, power stations, vehicles, and the soil and other sources. And since winter in Ulaanbaatar is very cold, the temperature drops minus 20 to 30 degrees in nighttime, there is a heating demand in GER areas. Actually, there is no centralized heating system. So the households use raw coal and wood for simplicity. And the principal source is vehicles, cars. Please next. And several studies focus on the reports, the sources of air pollution in Ulaanbaatar. And here in the slide, you see activity-based emission inventory, which is reported in 2013. And according to this activity-based emission inventory, the source of air pollutants are mainly the domestic cook stoves or small stoves are the source of PM 2.5, PM10, and SO2. And the main source of NO2 is vehicles. So actually, this kind of information determine the pollutant source should be updated further. And why gear areas are the main source of air pollutants? Because there are around 200,000 households or 200,000 chimneys, plus 3,000 heat-only boilers. And actually, each household consumes 5 tons of raw coal and 3 cubic meter of wood each year. And when smokes from the chimney is not too tall, it's around 3 meters, and smokes from the chimney are stagnated within the temperature inversion layer from the ground to several hundred meters in winter time. Yeah, air pollution in Ulaanbaatar has a special variation. And there was a Google map showing the clear boundary between gear areas and apartment, the building areas. And actually there is a distinct the feature in air quality. For example, at this a certain day, certain time, you see in gear areas, the air quality shows unhealthy condition, while apartment area shows a healthy or clear air condition. And based on the combustion experiment done at the GMIT, here the enrichment factors for trace elements in raw coal are shown here. And the fly ash from combustion of raw coal is found strongly enriched in trace elements. You see here the red bars is strongly very strong enrichment and strong enrichment in blue color. And the very strongly enriched elements are known to harm the human health and environment. Please next, yeah. Here, the time series of a PM 2.5 and the PM10 the temperature for the last few years are shown here. And there were tremendous efforts to combat, to reduce air pollution were effective for several years, for a decade. And in since 2019-2020 winter, the combustion of raw coal in Ulaanbaatar city is banned, and upgraded the briquette fuel is introduced. And you see here for the winter 2019-2020, concentrations of PM 2.5 and PM10 are reduced, and this the significant reduction is still seen for the last winter 2020-2021. And as you see, the PM concentrations are reduced by nearly half due to the replacement of raw coal with briquette fuel. Here you see the yearly averages of air pollutants, PM 2.5, PM10, SO2, NO2, and the red lines are the national standard level. So you see the yearly concentration exceed the national standard. And if we see some monthly or daily variations or the maximum values, then the concentration such exceedance is a very significant, and the concentration, for example, PM2.5 and PM10 concentrations might reach several thousand microgram per meter cube at a certain day in winter time. And the one of the principal pollutant source of NO2 is the vehicle. So you see how the number of cars increased with years. For example, the private cars were less than 4,000 in 1997. However, it reached to 75,000 in 2005, and nowadays almost 450,000. Private cars are operating in Ulaanbaatar. Okay, so we know that for the last 15 months, the world is suffering from the COVID-19 situation. However, there were some impact, the positive impact on environment and air quality is seen due to the COVID-19. And actually, we are having 4 strict lockdown period for since November last year until now. Actually, now we are on the 4th strict lockdown period, and here the figures show that the NO2 concentration is decreased by 39 to 45% during the strict lockdown period compared to the same period of last previous year. However, NO2 concentration decreased. SO2 concentration increased during last winter. That is because of the reason that the people are sitting at home and consuming more fuel for the heating and cooking purpose.
So I will now continue with some observations related to water and sanitation. And basically, when looking at the future of the water supply in Ulaanbaatar, basically we can state that we are coming close to the amounts of water that can be safely supplied from natural sources without having any large distance water transfer. So currently we need to state if the water's consumption of the city, which is still growing rapidly, further increases in the way that it did in the past few decades, we need to worry about the security of the urban water supply in the years after 2030. And when looking at water in the GEAR areas, there are specific challenges. One of them is the supply from water kiosks, where you can see in the picture on the left side, people bringing canisters and containers to a water kiosk, which they are filling up there, and then they need to walk a certain distance to take this home to their households. This water, on average, is far more expensive than the water that is supplied via the pipe supply system. But at the same time, people living in the GEAR areas tend to have a much lower purchasing power. And one of the problems that is related to the difficulties of water supply in the GEAR areas is that there is a severe underconsumption of water. So the only studies which exist on water consumption in GEAR areas state that it's approximately 12 liters per person and day, which would be below even the lowest recommendations by World Health Organization and other international organizations for what is really required for a safe survival. On the other hand, sometimes people use private wells for their water supply. And in the picture on the right hand, you can see a tire which marks basically the entrance of a well in the Gare area. You can see that this is the same space where pigs are roaming, and it's not very difficult to imagine that there is a significant risk that this water source can be polluted. And the wells, in some cases, it's maybe livestock that is being kept, but in many other cases, it's actually latrines being located in relatively close proximity to the wells. When looking at the municipal wastewater, I mentioned that it is sent to central wastewater treatment plants, but these treatment plants were set up during Soviet times, but they are often in a rather poor technical state, and sometimes spare parts are difficult to get. There has been a chronic underfunding of the municipal water supply and wastewater company. And in that way, it's no surprise that the wastewater is a major source of nutrient pollution in the receiving water bodies. So when we look, for example, at the Tool River, which is the major river flowing through the city of Ulaanbaatar, when looking at nitrate and phosphate concentrations upstream of the city, concentrations are 0.08 to 0.03 milligrams per liter respectively. And then when looking downstream of the central wastewater treatment plant, concentrations for nitrate increased fivefold. And when looking at phosphate, they have increased almost 30-fold. And this is definitely a challenge. We can't really say that the rivers of Mongolia are highly eutrophied these days, but urban wastewater is definitely leaves a footprint on the water quality. Now, when looking at the Gare areas, it's a major problem that nitrate concentrations in the groundwater are increasing. So when looking at in this picture, you see three zones: a green, a yellow, and a red one. The red one is a zone predominantly covered by Gare areas, and we see that the groundwater quality there is far less good than the groundwater quality in other parts of the city. A case study from Dachan, there is still no study on Ulaanbaatar, showed highly elevated levels of boron in the Gare areas, which is an indicator of pollution with soap and other detergent products. So it's not only the latrines which are polluting the groundwater, but people, of course, also need to dispose their household wastewaters in some way. And typically that means that the water is simply being infiltrated into the ground. Now, when looking at urban soils, we can state that there is a significant soil pollution in Ulaanbaatar. The one element that causes is the greatest source of concern is arsenic, where you can see a concentration of 64.1 milligrams per kilogram of soil on average, as the highest concentration as compared to the Mongolian soil standard of 6 milligrams per kilogram. And actually all soil samples tested from Ulaanbaatar so far exceeded the Mongolian soil standard for arsenic. An even greater concentration of arsenic was found locally near a former glass factory in Nalech district of Ulaanbaatar city, where arsenic was in the past used in the production and in the green coloring of glass used for bottles. But this is found only in a single location, whereas elevated concentrations are found throughout the city. For cadmium, you can see the problem is less strong. For chromium, elevated concentrations are frequently found, with the highest concentrations found near a tannery. But even then, we do see elevated chromium levels throughout the city. Copper, molybdenum, you can see significantly higher than the Mongolian soil standard. Nickel, lead, zinc, all sometimes showing significant concentrations in soils. And basically, some of these pollutants are believed to originate from the combustion of coal. Arsenic is a prime example. Mongolian coals, if compared to the world average, contain higher concentrations of arsenic than the world average coal. And in the Gea areas where a lot of coal is burned, it is therefore not surprising that arsenic concentrations in the soils are very high. Another problem that has been found is bacterial pollution in the soil. So in a recent study conducted in the Gea areas of Ulaanbaatar, 65.2% of the samples were found to be polluted with E. coli, 27% with Proteus bacteria species, Citrobacter in 12%, Enterococcus in 7.6%, Pseudomonas species in 3%, Salmonella in 9%, and Clostridium perfringens in 21% of the soil samples. It must be stated that that very little research has been done on this topic yet, but that there is a clear indication that soils tend to be most polluted near the pit latrines. So in distances of 2 to 4 meters from the pit latrines, bacterial pollution tends to be highest and then decreases with an increasing distance from latrines. So basically, when looking at the environmental pollution in Ulaanbaatar, we can state that the pollution of air, soil, and water are interconnected. And atmospheric pollution is very often the clue to pollution of the hydrosphere, but also pollution of the pedosphere and the soils. And that in turn will, in the end, of course, also end up in the biosphere. This will, in the long run, also have an effect on health and well-being of people. We can state that currently air pollution is probably the single biggest factor impacting the well-being of people, but also having clear negative effects on health. So people suffer from over proportionally high levels of lung diseases, of various cancers. Negative birth outcomes, for example, have been reported as a consequence of people being exposed to very high levels of air pollution. But on the other hand, this also threatens food security. So people living in the Gea areas very often keep livestock, or they produce vegetables for their own consumptions or for selling small quantities of vegetables. And when seeing the high levels of soil pollution, it's not it can really be feared that these foods would also not be safe for human consumption. And this is basically where a resource nexus approach is necessary to look at interlinkages between different environmental compartments, but also the anthroposphere. Now, one thing that has already been shown in literature is that bioaccumulation of various trace elements does take place, and in urban trees, for example, elevated concentrations of cadmium, molybdenum, and zinc have been shown. And cadmium is an element that has a very strong enrichment in the fly ash, originating from small stoves in the Gare areas. Molybdenum and zinc still has a strong enrichment in this fly ash. So we can then see that these elements also end up in the urban vegetation, and for one of the dominating tree species, the Siberian larch, negative effects on plant vitality have been described in literature. So far, no published information exists on heavy metal bioaccumulation in food, that is, products produced in urban and peri-urban agriculture. And this is really something that should be done in order to see whether these foods are really safe for human consumption. When looking at health outcomes from environmental pollution, we can basically state that any health outcomes depends on an external exposure from the environment. It depends, of course, also on the specific behavior of people. It depends on the genetic disposition of an individual person. But the thing that we are now looking at is the environmental exposure. And we can definitely say that if people are involved, are exposed to polluted environment in many different ways, that during their lifetime, there is a considerable risk that these pollutants would add up. So in case of Ulaanbaatar, we can definitely say that there is a risk of inhalation from air, because the air is very highly polluted, exceeding WHO standards, for example, for PM concentrations by factors of 100 and more during polluted winter days. There is a risk from the ingestion from polluted water and food. And there is also a certain risk through dermal absorption. And Professor Dong mentioned children play areas. And this is specifically the places, for example, kindergartens, that children go to where they would play outside. If the soils are highly polluted, there is even a risk that these substances are absorbed via the skin. So in the end, we can state that infrastructural fragmentation in Ulaanbaatar leads to specific phenomena related to air, water, and soil pollution, that the pollution pattern tend to be different in the apartment and the Gare areas. Most of the problems tend to be more severe in Gare areas, except for those pollution pattern that are mostly related to emissions from traffic. So traffic tends to be more dense in the inner city areas, so that in the end NOx concentrations are far higher there. The population is exposed to pollution in multiple exposure pathways, and these exposures in the end are additive. And when we now look in the future at infrastructural improvements, we think that they should be based on a resource nexus perspective, considering benefits and trade-offs for different environmental compartments. And most importantly, the goal should be to minimize the total pollutant exposure for large parts of the population. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Please also stay connected with us by having a look at our websites and our social media channels. And we are, of course, very happy now to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Daniel Karthe, Professor Gantuya Ganbat. And I wonder whether we have any questions raised from the chat box from the audience.
Can I ask a question in the meantime?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Daniel and Professor Ganbat and Halim for an absolutely, I actually don't have a word for it, fantastic presentation that was absolutely all-encompassing and touched upon so many different challenges, infrastructures, issues. It was very, very comprehensive, and I think gave us a very good overview of the challenges that Ulaanbaatar is facing. Now, I've had many, many questions, and the moment I wrote them up within the next few slides that you showed, you actually answered them. So thank you for that as well. I do have, however, one very basic question probably. What you showed at the beginning of the presentation was a very clear division between the GEA areas and the apartment areas. And I wonder if, well, first of all, what does urban growth mean in the context of Ulaanbaatar? Is it really a central expansion from the center, as it would seem from the map that you showed, or is it a more fragmented approach? Are GEA areas replaced simply by apartment areas? How does this urban growth happen? And what does that mean for infrastructure? Is it a patchwork kind of growth and transformation, or is it really growing from the inside out? And that's a question that I'm asking as an architect and a former architect and an urban designer, because it would be really interesting for me to understand how this transformation takes place, and then from there to think through what that means for infrastructural modernization, if you like, connections, what that means for the correlation between these infrastructures, and how infrastructural habits in GEA areas impact on infrastructural realities in apartment areas, if you like, and vice versa. So yeah, that would be a very basic question that I'm very curious about.
Yes, thank you very much for this question, Deliana. And basically, we can state that the city, when we look at the past 30 years, when the last phase of strong urban growth happened, basically the city has been growing both in the apartment areas, so new apartment buildings are being built all the time, and there is even an overcapacity right now of apartment buildings. The city has grown both in the apartment areas, but also in the GEA areas. And the typical thing is that people would, newcomers from the countryside who are moving to Ulaanbaatar for the first time, they would often not have the financial means to maybe buy an apartment in the city right away. So they would, in the beginning, often move into the GEA areas. And eventually, people would find a job in the city, and over a certain time, maybe be able to save enough money to then move into the apartment areas. But at the same time, more and more people are still moving towards the city, so that the GEA areas continue to be growing as well. And basically, space is limited in the inner areas of the cities, of the city. So the current trend is that basically there is not much spatial growth anymore happening in the past few years, but that the apartment buildings are getting higher and higher. So that maybe the old buildings had something like 6, 8, or 10 floors, but that now buildings are being set up that have 20, 30, 40 floors. The GER areas are not really comparable to slum areas of cities in other countries of, say, South Asia or Southeast Asia, but people would still often have a job. People living in the GER areas often feel more connected to the nomadic culture of the country by still living in the traditional felt tents. They have far more space because they have their own plots of land. So it's not so much a problem of social stigma, but of very challenging living conditions. And when now looking at government plans, there are basically two approaches. One would be to, in the future, replace the GER areas by apartment areas. And sometimes maybe politicians in their master plans are dreaming of a future city in which all the GER areas would be replaced by apartment areas and everybody enjoying a connection to high quality infrastructures. But at the same time, this is not a very realistic scenario for the near future, because it's simply half of the population living there, and there is a reason why people live in these GER areas, namely the non-affordability of an apartment for them. So there is no easy solution. An alternative approach is, of course, to upgrade the living conditions and the environmental conditions in the GER areas. And one very good example was mentioned by Professor Ganbat, one of the very few successful countermeasures to environmental pollution in the past few years. And that is the substitution of raw coal by a processed and improved briquette coal, which is not reducing air pollution to zero, but as you saw on the first numbers that we saw, a 50% reduction at the very, very immense pollution levels is, of course, already a very good step into the right direction. And sometimes it might simply be more realistic to go in such small steps that in the end bring a measurable improvement in environmental quality and in living quality for the local population.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Daniel Karthe, for your very explanatory talk. And time-wise, we shall proceed to the final presentation delivered by Dr. Ren. And if there are any more questions raised from the audience or from the panelists, please feel free to raise them at the very end of the session. So let's now welcome Dr. Youcao Ren. Dr. Ren was trained as an urban historian at the University of Sheffield, where she obtained a PhD in landscape study. Her research interest in urban transition blends ethnographic and historical perspectives and has primarily focused on the rapidly urbanizing East China. Dr. Ren joined the University of Manchester in 2019 to work with Dr. Deliana and colleagues on the international research project quoted SASI as a research associate. The SASI project took Shanghai as an urbanization paradigm and inquired migrant women's everyday sanitation practice within wider human ecosystems. And her research, a recent study has adapted a gendered lens in exploring everyday sanitation practices among migrant women in Shanghai. So now please welcome Dr. Ren. You have the floor, please.
you, Junyan, for the lovely introduction. I think you've covered many important points in my upcoming presentation, so thank you for helping me saving the time. My talk today is very specific. I focus on migrant women's everyday sanitation access in dense urban environment, which is Shanghai. This is developed on an empirical study we conducted in central Shanghai back in the late 2019, and then again late 2020, because we were apparently stopped by COVID-19. This work is in fact a very small part of the international research project, Systems Approach to Sustainable Sanitation Challenges in Urbanizing China, aka SASI. So SASI is funded by UKRI, and it is accommodated here at University of Manchester. So why sanitation, and why migrant women, and why everyday sanitation practice? I will first try to explain these three different focuses in the first part of my presentation. Then I will try to present empirical case studies that we extracted from Shanghai. I will then try to conclude the presentation with some thoughts and reflections. So why sanitation? Sanitation is obviously at the heart of United Nations agenda for sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goal 6, which is SDG 6, aim to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all by 2030. So this is a very interesting time frame, which I will come back to this later. So although considerable progress has been made since the turn of the new millennium, 2.3 billion people today globally still lack access to basic sanitation. So that is nearly a quarter of the world's population, which means we still have a very long way to go in order to achieve the UN goal of leave no one behind at 2030, because we've got only 9 years left, whereas we have a quarter of the population in the world still lack access to basic sanitation. Therefore, I think improving our understanding of sanitation transitions will, of course, contribute significantly towards achieving multiple SDGs, in fact. So SDG 6, Safe Water and Sanitation for All, is, of course, the foundation of, say, SDG 5, which is achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. And it is also the foundation of SDG 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. Also SDG 11, sustainable communities and cities. Also on the top of my head, SDG 1, and poverty, and SDG 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being at all ages, also require the achievement of adequate sanitation for all. So the map here indicates global access to sanitation in 2015. As we can see, global inequalities persist. Africa is the most challenged area, and then South Asia. East Asia in general has about 60 to 70% coverage of improved sanitation, but then East Asia is accommodating about 20% of the global population, which means many people in East Asia still are struggling with adequate sanitation. I here want to promote our project a little bit. So SASI studies sustainability outcomes across different sanitation systems, environments, and temporal scales. As Junyan just introduced, we focus on Shanghai in China as a prime example of the global south urbanization. Shanghai currently accommodates 24 million people, and this megacity offers opportunities to study co-involving urban environments at different stages of infrastructural transitions. We have a very interdisciplinary team here at the University of Manchester and MMU, also in our partner institutes of University of Aberdeen, Tokyo University, and of course, our lovely partners in Tongji University in Shanghai. So in the project, we conduct both quantitative and qualitative research in order to understand sanitation transitions over time. So my presentation here is really a very, very small part of SASI. So So for anyone who is interested to know more about projects, I have attached the website where we have put all the detailed project description and updates on it. You can also review our parallel projects in India and Brazil on the website. So everyone, please do click on the link. So why do I choose to focus on migrant women, which is a very specific group? Firstly, I think women in general have additional and more complex sanitation needs that often remain unmet. These do not just include physical challenges such as menstruation and pregnancy, but also privacy and safety while using sanitation facilities. Sanitation is of course important to everyone, but in comparison, women are more vulnerable than men. In general, women are much more bonded to domestic labor, including those sanitation related. These might include, but not restricted to, for instance, water fetching and night pot cleaning. This greater involvement also led to women's greater interest in improving sanitation facilities. And it also leads to the fact that when I was conducting my field study, women has a stronger opinion towards inadequate sanitation facilities. Compared to men, women also have to travel more frequently for sanitation when indoor sanitation is not available. So here I just want to play a very, very quick video showing local older women cleaning the night pots on a daily basis. I'm very sorry that I have to cut the video in the middle because then I realized I kind of showed the participant face in the video, which is not ethical. But I think that proved my point vividly. That's how women is frequently bounded by this labor demand. So on top of, on top of all these challenges, migrant women are particularly challenged because of their disadvantaged socioeconomic status in the cities. So by looking at migrant women, we are in fact considering the sanitation experience and needs of one of the most marginalized and vulnerable social group in dense urban environment. So this responds to UN's goal of leave no one behind. I also developed my focus on migrant women because of my own research identity as a female researcher when I was in Shanghai. So during my field study, I developed autoethnography of me using urban public sanitation facilities while spending most of the time outside in the city. And I rely on public sanitation facilities during these 10, 12 hours of a day. So although my struggles were, of course, nothing compared to those of migrant women, because I get to go back to my hotel and spend the rest of 8 hours in a nice hotel, our everyday sanitation experience had somehow related to one another at a certain extent. My main theoretical framework of everyday sanitation practice draws on practice theory. I'm not going to go too deep into the theoretical aspects, but in particular, I seek to identify and understand the three actors of everyday practice that are material, meaning, and competence. So allow me to make a very simple example. A simple practice of flush a public toilet, for example, involved the material arrangement of the flush toilet itself. It also involved water and probably toilet tissue. It also requires one to be capable of press the button in order to flush, which is competence. And to flush a public toilet, one needs to understand that the necessity of flushing as either a hygiene requirement or a common courtesy for the newcomers of the public toilet, which are the meanings of flushing the toilet. I also paid much attention on transitions, which is how certain practices come to be, how different practices are interconnected and involved in different urban environments. So now enough with the background and theoretical framework. I would like to move forward a little bit to the more empirical part of this research, which consists of two parts. A, what is urban sanitation in Shanghai? And B, how are migrant women affected on a daily basis? I don't think I need to address the importance of Shanghai as an urban model in China and in East Asia more generally, because I think Professor Dong had covered that vividly. After about 3 to 4 decades of urban regeneration, Shanghai has, of course, accomplished astonishing progress in terms of infrastructure transition and infrastructure upgrading. In the very central Shanghai, however, the old and new coexist. So this picture here that I took during my field study reflects this fact vividly. In this picture alone, we can identify more than 3 sanitation infrasystems, include the very modern or the new ones that developed after 2000. So in these areas, individual flush toilets are connected to municipal pipe network and they are properly treated. Then we also see these apartment blocks, which are roughly developed in the 1980s and 1990s. So in these areas, individual flush toilets are more likely collected to septic tanks. So that's the second systems we identified. We also have this massive area of traditional dwellings in central Shanghai, which means residents here rely on surface-based sanitation system. In Shanghai's case, residents have to carry night pots and empty the night pot at excrement stations. Most of the night pots are loosely sealed, some are not, which means residents are sometimes at high risk of contacting with the excrement directly. In SASI, we have selected 6 different sites in conversation with our lovely Tongji partners in order to reflect sharp differences between infra typologies and the residence demographics. However, my focus today does not involve all these 6 sites. As I have highlighted in the list here, Site 1 and 2 are particularly relevant to migrant women because these are old and low-income urban area which migrant workers can afford to reside in. So I want to address here though that migrant women here refer to female migrant workers that come to the cities as labor input and they will later return to their home in rural areas. This map here just gives us a very brief demonstration of our site locations. Our sites 1 and 2, marked as CX and HN, are both located in the very central and very historical parts of Shanghai. This is also where infrastructural transition are much challenged because of the coexisting of old and new. Whereas if we think back to Professor Dong's presentation, infrastructural development and transitions are much easier in the new towns which are outside of Shanghai. So the first site I'm looking at is a 1930s Shikumen residence area in central Shanghai. So in local language, Shikumen means stone-gated houses, as you can see from the pictures, that all the doors are decorated by stones and bricks. The site is developed in early to mid 1930s, and it is merely a few minutes walk away from Shanghai's iconic People's Square. It is one of the largest remaining Shikumen area in central Shanghai, and residents here mostly consist of native retirees and migrant workers. This is a very dense site in which it is the norm that 4 to 6 households share a house. So each household will only have 1 room to reside in, or 2 if they're lucky. There's no indoor sanitation. So the local former sanitation system is surface-based. But the area is gated. So there is a very clear sense of community, and many of the native retirees residing here for decades are retired workers. So they've known each other for a lifetime, and they also quite have a say at local sanitation. The most common practice here consists of the usage of nightpot, which is this red small thing in here, and excrement station, which is this half-opened gray building here. So one will need to PM pool into the nightpot and carry a full nightpot to the station in order to empty the nightpot. So as I mentioned before, the nightpot can be loosely sealed by the lid, or it is not. It can be completely open. The excrement station will then be pumped, and the excrement will be transported for treatment on a regular basis. An excrement station is commonly attached with community urinals. So if we have a look at the picture on the right hand here, the opening on the right-hand side is the opening of excrement station, which people can pour their nightpot into. And on the left-hand side, the small door here, people are entering into the community urinal. And of course, this half-opened urinal is only available to men. And as we indicate in the picture, all the female residents have to wait outside until one finish using the community urinal that they can go in and pour the nightpot into the opening. There are self-developed toilets in some of these houses, providing 1A lives on the ground floor and has the space for it, and B, the neighbors are okay with it. For those who live on the second and third floor of a house, they are not able to do so because these 1930s houses are so old that no construction can be made on the second and third floor. All the wooden structure of the buildings are already rotten when I visited the site. But those rooms with indoor sanitation or self-developed indoor sanitation are really a migrant's house. And this is because migrant workers need to retain a very low rent in order to maximize their financial effectiveness. Income they made in Shanghai are commonly remitted back to home to support their family members at home to either upgrading their own houses or to set up a small business so they can stop farming. As such, most migrants rely on public sanitation facilities instead of these indoor. In Site 1, there are 2 public toilets outside of the community, as I marked here. So public toilet 1 and public toilet 2. Most of the residents can reach to one of these 2 toilets within about 5 minutes walk. So this might sound okay in the first instance because, well, 5 minutes walk, it sounds all right. But the effort is in fact quite considerable, especially for women due to the fact that they can't use community urinals. So every time they need to use the toilet, they have to walk out to the community and walk for 5 minutes and queue for the public toilet. And both public toilets, although very well developed, have opening time from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So it is not 24/7, which means if one needs to use the toilet at night, and if one is a woman, she will be in trouble. So here I demonstrate how migrant women walk out of the community and walk to a public toilet that she uses on a regular basis. I'm not gonna play the full video, but I just want to demonstrate you how much effort it is. So I worked with my participant, and this is about 4.5 minutes process. She has to wait for the traffic light and cross the street and keep walking in the park until she reaches to the public toilet. And this is providing the fact that my participant is in her late 30s and with great mobility. But I want to particularly highlight the impact of toilet revolution here, though. So toilet revolution was launched by President Xi Jinping back in 2015. The aim of the initiative was at first to change the external image of China, because many foreigners were complaining about how messy and dirty public toilets in China were. Subsequently, it has led to the increasing number of urban public toilets, and conditions of these toilets are also significantly improved. As we can see from the picture, these public toilets are all safely managed, and they provide very sufficient hand washing facilities, and it is well managed by government staffs. Two charts here to indicate the most up-to-date number of public toilets nationally and in Shanghai. So by 2019, we have 150 public toilets nationwide. In Shanghai, by 2018, we have about 6,000. As we can see from the chart on the right-hand side, the number is not increasing on a constant basis. We reached the peak, well, Shanghai reached the peak in 2012, whereas since 2015, the number is up and down. If anyone is interested, there are many videos posted by news channels that explains toilet revolution on YouTube, but I don't think we have time to watch either one of them. But this is just for your information. So based on our site observation and in-depth interview of everyday sanitation among migrant women, also thanks to the help of our brilliant research assistant, we are able to summarize a user's profile. Shan here represents migrant women that are residing in the area. So they're mostly, of course, at their working age because they're labor inputs. They hold rural hukou, which means they can't stay permanently in city. They have to return to rural areas when they stop working in Shanghai. Most of them have individual flush toilets at home, thanks to China's rural development, which means they show a low level of acceptance of the usage of night pots in central Shanghai. As such, they tend to rely on public sanitation facilities during due time. It is now free to use a public toilet in Shanghai and quite convenient, as we can see from the previous picture. However, they have extremely limited engagement with local service and information. I mentioned that Site 1 has certain level of neighborhood supervision, as in people talk, but as in support and opinion involvement in local program, migrant women have very, very little involvement in those. Then Site 2, which used to be an off-grid area or informal settlement in the very central part of Shanghai before the found of China, well, the current China. And now in a socialist context, it is all registered with the government. So it is very much as like the gear area that was mentioned in the previous presentation. Municipal services are provided to the residents and all the houses are registered under the name of the residents. It has quite similar formal sanitation system of night pod and excrement station. But because houses here are much more loosely connected, as you can see, it is developed actually on a road. So there's much less neighborhood connection formed in the area. As a result, informal sanitation facilities are much more commonly seen. I will present to you another picture to indicate the point. So as you can see, this site is in fact developed along and on a long road, which means it is not gated. It is not a community in any sense. And if people have to use the formal service-based sanitation facilities, they have to walk out of their home and walk into the street to use the excrement station. Although the excrement stations here are regularly pumped and cleaned, local residents do indicate the sense that it is not, the facilities are not belonged to the residents here. So let's take a very close look at local urinal and excrement station. In Site 1, these buildings are within a gated community. Here, they are on the street. So on the left-hand side, this is where men can enter the building and use the urinal. On the right-hand side, this is the small opening where people can empty their night pot. So many people actually put their full night pot here by the excrement station and come to pour it when they have the time. For women, this is quite challenging, as I have attached a screenshot of interview transcription from one of my participants. She was very pregnant, she was 7 months pregnant, and she was first arrived to Shanghai and wanted to use the toilet. But when she entered the building, she realized this is only for men, but not for women. So what this participant done afterwards is that she became the voice in the family that decide to develop informal sanitation facilities indoor. And this was the participant that provided us the narrative about her experience of using public urinal when she was 7 months pregnant. I have listed out some of the self-developed toilets built by migrant families in the area, and numbers that I listed out below the pictures are in fact the amount of Chinese yuan they spent on the toilet development. So 8,000 convert to roughly about 800 quid. Compared to the income of migrant family, this is not a huge amount of money, which is also one of the reasons that they choose to develop these indoor sanitation facilities, because compared to the trouble that they have to walk out of the street and realize they can't use the community urinal, they would rather spend approximately 800 quid to develop indoor sanitation facilities. So again, thanks to our research assistant, we are able to summarize user profile based on the investigated practices. So Yuexia here, again, they are at their working age. They also hold rural hukou. They have very similar backgrounds and experience, also practice compared to migrant women in Site 1. And they have almost no engagement with local service, information, or local residents committee. After we summarized user profiles and everyday sanitation practices, we examine these practices within a wider human ecosystem and inquire how they interact with other critical systems, such as water resources as natural resources, or institutional and social norms. So why women washing and cleaning night pot is the norm, why not men? So by doing so, we are expecting the purpose of better informed policy or design-focused intervention. So in these two investigated old and low-income urban areas, we can see from the previous narrative and user profiles that Toilet Revolution as a national initiative has indeed made an improvement on public sanitation facilities. But migrant women's overall access to sanitation remain much more restricted compared to the others. We can also see that migrant women remain the main driving force within migrant households to either improve or develop informal sanitation facilities. As such, we again recognize women's participation is critical to the successful development of sanitation interventions at all levels. So we again appeal for the involvement of women's voices in local sanitation programs. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ren. That's fascinating. Now we welcome questions from all panelists and attendees. Please feel free to speak and unmute yourself now. If all speakers can turn on their cameras and pose any questions or comments you have now. If you need more time, I think I actually want to pose a point that it's really fascinating to see how under this umbrella term of East Asian, we see so many different infrastructure challenges, and then also how fascinating how different sectors are responding to this. And obviously we clearly see lines of divisions geographically, but fundamentally socially due to the, for example, labor demand, due to the the rapid urbanization, and of course, Ulaanbaatar and Shanghai are at different development stages, so there are clearly different prime concern that have been raised. But it's also interesting to see how there's a generally wider awareness of participatory planning being raised up to the formal planning regime, and how the efficacy of government-led reforming projects has been taken in effect. So this, I think, is pretty much the essence of INFRA Plus series, is to not addressing really complementary issues, but we bring in different perspectives and see how different regimes have been addressing issues in their respective context. So are we seeing any questions or comments coming up? And time-wise, we're doing really well. In terms of the what Dr. Zhen talked about, the division of migrant women's access to sanitation services, I also wanted to raise another question regarding Dr. Dong's presentation about play infrastructure. I wonder whether the play infrastructure, the play projects, outdoor children's play projects have been somehow related to the migrant workers' status. For example, whether the very good-looking, very fascinating projects have been in proximity to any migrant workers' residence, whether they have this time or effort, time or access to the play infrastructure. I think that would be interesting to see as well. Yeah, that's from me.
Well, I think Professor Dong is probably the best people to answer this, but from my perspective, from a very more sanitation perspective, there are, as Professor Dong mentioned, community renewal programs going on in central Shanghai, which old communities are being redesigned and redeveloped, and many residents are provided with individual sanitation. However, what I observed in these communities, once these old communities are being renewed, the living conditions are much more improved, also the sanitation infrastructure in the area, which means the rent will increase. So many migrants choose to move away from this renewed area because their first concern is finance. So this is also one of the reasons that they are very little involved in the renewed program, because, well, the community is much nicer than before, but then it is more expensive as well. Okay.
Just a very quick add-up question. So as you said, the migrant workers, female migrant workers, they have little access, or they are little informed by the local service and information. I wonder how they dealt with this access to public toilets during pandemic, when the lockdown was in place, how they dealt with their daily needs to use the public toilets.
I think during the pandemic, public toilets in Shanghai are very well disinfected, and it's very well managed. But I can't say too much about it because we were not able to conduct investigation in Shanghai while pandemic happened. So what I can see from news reports and local residents' feedback is that public toilets are very safe to be used because it's regularly maintained, and it is in fact better maintained than before, before the pandemic. But I can't provide